So I have idle running, and I don't use idle a whole lot because I don't really like it. But for discussing booleans and showing some of the boolean stuff in a faster manner, idle can be useful so that way I'm not having to constantly save and rerun through terminal. So I talked a little bit about booleans before, right? So boolean is true and boolean is false. And if we input those into Python, it will mimic them right back to us. And so Boolean is a binary system. It's either true or it's false. There's no half-truths or kinda trues or sorta falses. It's either true or it's not true. It's true or it's false. And I think we played a little bit before also with showing comparatives. So like if we say that if we make x and y and we assign them values, so maybe like 6 and 7, so x and y now should equal 6 and 7. We can say like x is greater than y, and it'll say false because it's not. Whereas we could say x is less than y, and it'll kick out true. And we can go through these with different things. If we wanted to instead set x and y to the same value, so 7 and 7, now if we say x is greater than y, we'll get false, and if we say x is less than y, we'll also get false because they are equal to each other. Now in addition to greater than and less than, there's also greater than or equals to, which will kick out true, since they're the same, or less than or equals to, which will also kick out true since they're the same. We already did that x is equal to y. We could also do that x is not equal to y. You can also represent that as greater than and less than, but Python doesn't like it. So in Python, you can do the exclamation point and equals. You also have x is y, which is true, or x is not y. So you can do that as well. X equal sign, y is true, and x is y is true. And those seem like they're interchangeable, but they're not exactly. So, for example, if we were to instead say x and y each equal a list that contains 7 inside of it, and we haven't gotten to lists yet, but we'll get into them later. So currently up here, x and y are both 7. Now we're going to make x and y both equal to lists that have 7 inside of them. It's not really much of a list because there's only one thing inside of it, but that's besides the point. We'll talk about lists later. Anyway, you see they're the same, right? So if I were to say that x is equal to y, oops, I am sorry, Python. If I were to say x is equal to y, we get true. And if I were to say that x is not equal to y, we get false. But if I were to say that x is y, they're false. And if I were to say that x is not y, that will kick out true. Because these are different lists. They might contain the same thing in them, but they are actually different. So if I tell it that I want to know what the ID of x currently is, we get that. And if I ask what the ID of y is, we get that. They're not exactly the same. You can see there's some differences there in the numbers. So Python has created a list object for me and put it in for x, and it has created another list object, and that's y. If we go back to assigning x and y both equal to 7, and we do the IDs again, now they're the exact same. Both x and y, the variables are pointing to the same integer. They're both pointing to 7. And that's a little confusing, but it's not really going to be very important for you at this point in time. Depending on what you do later on, or what you decide to do with programming, I mean, maybe it might be relevant to you. For the majority of people, it's not relevant. But I wanted to make sure it was clear that they're not exactly the same. What else can we do? Oh, so I mentioned ID. There's also type. I don't think we've talked about type yet. Maybe we have. So if I do true, it's a bool. And if I do false, it should also be a bool. So type will tell you what type it is. If we were to do type and we were to put true inside of quotes, it's not a bool, it's a string. It just happens to say true. We could do that with a number or a number inside of quotes, and you can play with that and see what happens. Now we can also do something similar to this to convert stuff. Just like this is a string here that we typed that in, if we were instead to tell it string or str to convert something into a string, and we told it true, this Boolean type, now it is a string of true. You can see the two single quotes around it. If we wanted to convert it into an int, true is equal to 1, whereas false is equal to 0. So there's that binary idea, right? So 1 is on, 1 is true, false is off, false is 0. True is something, false is nothing. If we were to tell it that we wanted to convert something to a Boolean type, like a number, that's going to give us true. If we instead tell it that we want to convert nothing, that's going to be false. We can also give it negative numbers. So what's a negative number going to give us? Is it going to give us false because it's below 0? Or is it going to give us true because it's not 0? It's going to give us true. It considers 0 like null, like 0 is like nothing. Whether it's positive or whether it's negative, that's not nothing, that's something, and so it counts it as true. If we were to convert a string of anything, we'll get true. And if we convert an empty string, we'll get false. It's empty. So kind of the same thing. Now we can also play with some math. So we could do like 5 int of true, which should give us 6. We could do 5 plus int of false, which if that's 0, should give us 5 still, which it does. Of course, we don't even have to convert these. Python tries to know what we mean, so if we just tell it 5 plus true, it's going to automatically convert it for us. Which I guess is a little different than if we're doing it with a string, right? So if we do 5 plus 5 as a string, it gives us, well, it doesn't. It breaks because it won't concatenate it, and it won't add it, so it's not sure what we really want it to do. It doesn't convert that one for us, but it does convert the bools for us. Anyway, does any of that really matter to you? Yeah, probably not, but that's okay.